Yeah. Blackjack. Life is like a game of cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother. Yo, what up? It's your boy StraightGameTV. Welcome back. I hope you, before you do anything, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell a friend. I'm back once again with some very important information in regards to Afeni Shakur and 2Pac Shakur. After 2Pac died, his mom actually filed a lawsuit against Suge Knight and David Kenner. And one of the claims in that lawsuit was for the Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organization Act. Basically, the lawyers that they had on the case had did their research and due diligence and found out that they were alleging that David Kenner and Suge Knight had a scheme going on where they were racketeering and doing corrupt things involving 2Pac Shakur and not paying him his money and basically diverting the money for their own personal good. And so, like I said, thank you for tuning in, and let me get right into it. It goes on to say, this count is based on the Racketeer, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, the title number of the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970, as amended, 18 U.S.C. Sections 1961 and 1968, the RICO Act. And then it goes on to say, Suge Knight, Norris Anderson, and David Kenner, and unknown employees or agents of death row, are persons within the meaning of the RICO Act 19613, which defines person to include any individual or entity capable of holding a legal or beneficial interest in property. And then it goes on to say, at all times relevant hereto, death row was an enterprise within the meaning of the 18 U.S.C. Section 19614. And then it says, subsequent to making the Dannemora Agreement, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Norris Anderson, and unknown employees and agents of death row, developed and entered into a pervasive and continuous conspiracy and scheme to steal from 2Pac and to convert his assets by depriving him of monetary advances and royalties which he was entitled to receive pursuant to that agreement, which is basically known what the court and 2Pac's mom was saying was the conspiracy, how they conspired against 2Pac. And then it goes on to say, by reason of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Norris Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of death row, caused and permitted funds believed to be in excess of $50 million to be diverted from 2Pac while he lived, and from his estate after his death. And then it goes on to say, as a result of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Norris Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of death row have personally benefited, and 2Pac's estate and its beneficiaries have been damaged in the amount which cannot be determined with certainty at this time, but which plaintiffs presently believe to be in the excess of $50 million. And then it goes on to say, in furtherance of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Norris Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of death row, on behalf of death row, agreed that death row would finance the production of musical recordings and videos of 2Pac, would control the production of those musical recordings and videos, and would arrange for the marketing and distribution, interstate commerce of those musical recordings and videos, not only in every state of the United States, but throughout the world. And then it goes on to say, also in the furtherance of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, Norris Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of death row, on behalf of death row, agreed amongst themselves to deprive 2Pac, his agents, attorneys, accountants, and employees of financial records and financial information which they required in order to determine whether monetary advances and royalties were due, owing, and payable to 2Pac by death row pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement. And then it goes on to say, also in the furtherance of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, Norris Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of Death Row, on behalf of Death Row, agreed amongst themselves that they would falsely represent to 2Pac, his agents, attorneys, accountants, and employees that no monetary advances were due, owing, and payable to 2Pac by Death Row pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement, when such monetary advances and royalties were in fact due, owing, and payable to 2Pac. Basically, they saying that they told 2Pac he wasn't owed any money, and you have to sue us, and that was another reason why 2Pac was leaving Death Row. It was as simple as that, you know what I mean? And as I get into this, you'll understand why, because it was certain instances where they actually talk about 2Pac having people work on his behalf, trying to get that so he wouldn't have that personal riff, and hanging out with Suge and partying the whole 9 yards, and then having to ask him where my money at, where's the accounting at. So he had people do that on his behalf. And then it goes on to say, in furtherance thereof, in or about February 1996, 2Pac, who was then in New York, had a telephone conversation with Suge Knight and another Death Row representative who were in California, in which Knight and such representative advised 2Pac that he had already spent $2 million more than he was entitled to receive. In furtherance thereof, on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, commencing on or about November 1995 and proceeding through at least June 1996, at the direction of Suge Knight, David Kenner, Cantrock, and Anderson, 2 employees of 2Pac, Yasmin and Molly, caused proposed budgets to be sent by fax and mailed to Death Row, wherein 2Pac requested the release of his monies for the operation of his businesses. In each instance, Suge Knight, David Kenner, Cantrock, and Anderson called on the telephone, faxed, and mailed back refusals to release said funds, foreciting as the reason therefore both the failure of the budget to include all items of expense, such as missing car payments, and the claim that no net monies were due from Death Row to 2Pac. In truth, the reason the monies were not released was because they were being misappropriated by Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, using the Death Row enterprise as their cover for their misappropriations. And then it goes on to say, also in furtherance of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of Death Row on behalf of Death Row, agreed amongst themselves to falsely and fraudulently conceal the fact that monetary advances and royalties were due, owing, and payable to 2Pac by Death Row pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement, by debiting 2Pac's account, the account, with alleged expenses which were either fictitious or which were not attributable to 2Pac's account, the fictitious expenses, and by deducting the fictitious expenses from monies owed to 2Pac. And then it goes on to say, also in furtherance of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of Death Row on behalf of Death Row, agreed amongst themselves to falsely and fraudulently conceal the fact that monetary advances and royalties were due, owing, and payable to 2Pac by Death Row pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement, by causing Death Row to create false and fraudulent financial records which listed fictitious expenses which may have understated the income received from the sales of 2Pac records and videos. Then it goes on to say, on numerous occasions in 1995 and 96 and continuing to 1997, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, and unknown employees or agents of Death Row, using the United States mail to send checks to third parties, then debiting the account with the amounts of those checks which were fictitious expenses. And then it goes on to say, in furtherance of the conspiracy, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, and unknown employees, agents of Death Row, at various times in 1996, produced false and fraudulent financial records which listed fictitious expenses. And then it goes on to say, during his lifetime, 2Pac, his agents, attorneys, representatives, and employees in 1996 via telephone made repeated inquiries, the inquiries of Suge Knight, David Kenner, Anderson, and employees of Death Row as to the monetary advances and royalties due payable and owing Tupac pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement. And then it goes on to say, Suge Knight, David Kenner, Anderson, and employees of Death Row repeatedly responded to the inquiries by falsely and fraudulently stating that not only did Death Row not owe Tupac any monetary advances or royalties, but that his account showed that Tupac owed money to Death Row. At the time these statements were made, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, and employees of Death Row, they knew those statements to be false and fraudulent. At the time those statements were made, Suge Knight, David Kenner, and Anderson, and the employees of Death Row knew that Death Row actually owed Tupac millions of dollars pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement. And then it goes on to say, between September 15th and October 22nd, 1996, plaintiffs, as the legal representatives of 2Pac's estate, repeatedly demanded of the defendants that they be given financial records and information which would enable them to determine the amount owed to 2Pac's estate pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement. Then it goes on to say, subsequent to 2Pac's death during the period of September 15th to October 22nd, 1996, the defendants caused to be sent to the plaintiffs in New York via the United States mail financial records containing fictitious expenses in order to falsely make them believe that no monies were owed to 2Pac's estate pursuant to the Dannemora Agreement, when in fact millions of dollars were owed. Then it goes on to say, on numerous occasions during 1996, David Kenner, while purporting to act as 2Pac's attorney, caused to be sent to Tupac via the United States mail and interstate wires numerous letters and documents which involved and discussed the fictitious expenses. Then it goes on to say, the conduct alleged above consisted of series of more than 2 acts of interrelated criminal acts, and thus constituting a pattern of racketeering activity within the meaning of the federal RICO statute in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1962 C and D. And then it goes on to say, plaintiffs are persons within the meaning of the federal RICO statute and have been injured by reasons of violation of 18 U.S.C. sections 1962 C and D. As alleged above, such violations have caused the loss of over $50 million, as well as the loss and the use of such funds during and after the period those funds were being fraudulently diverted by defendants. Once again, hit the share button, hit the like button, and I wanted to bring you this because, once again, I wanted to offer you clarification in regards to the 2Pac situation while he was on death row. A lot of people come up with speculation, but I wanted to give you the facts involving that. Like I said, nobody would know the situation more than 2Pac's mother, because as he was very close to his mother, he talked to his mother about everything, including what he was owed from death row, what they didn't pay him, and the current situation up until the point he died. And that was the premise in which she filed this lawsuit under. So, like I said, saying nothing bad about Suge Knight as a person, but as far as business was concerned, there really wasn't any upfront business being done according to how a normal record company would be run from that perspective, as you see by this lawsuit, not by the words or what I want you to believe. So the algorithms, I hope they kick up and start getting me more people in here to check out this great content. And your boy, Straight Game.